Доброго дня, шановні колеги, шановні учасники цього вебінару. Будь ласка, дайте знати, чи нас гарно чутно і видно. Якщо у вас якісь будуть проблеми зі звуком або з зображенням, будь ласка, дайте нам знати в чаті. Якщо ні, то ми будемо починати. Отже, мене звати Тетяна Міськова, я виконуюча обов'язки директора Офісу з просування експорту. І сьогодні в нас черговий захід в серії «Експорт Talks», де ми говоримо про особливості торгівлі в Євросоюзі, а також про зміни торгівлі України з країнами Євросоюзу, пов'язаними з впливом COVID-19 і, в принципі, будь-якими змінами, які відбуваються у світі. Отже, сьогодні ми робимо цей захід знову ж таки з нашими партнерами Ukrainian Business and Trade Association. Ми дуже раді за допомогу, за можливість долучити шановних експертів. І сьогодні ми будемо говорити про наслідки, скажімо так, події, яка сталася і стається. Наскільки ви всі знаєте, Німеччина очолила Раду Євросоюзу, і тепер в зміни, які будуть пов'язані з головуванням саме Німеччини в Євросоюзі, ми хотіли би сьогодні обговорити. Отже, не буду довго забирати час. У нас сьогодні надзвичайно цікаві спікери, і на нас чекає надзвичайно цікава дискусія. Отже, хочу передати слово пану Назару Бобицькому, який є директором Брюссельського офісу Ukrainian Business and Trade Association, для подальшого діалогу. І прошу Назара розпочати захід. Дякую.
Дякую дуже, Тетяно, за цю прекрасну можливість продовжувати працювати з вами для блага наших експортерів. Шановні учасники, мене звати Назар Бобицький, я керівник Брюссельського офісу Української асоціації бізнесу і торгівлі, УАБТ. І сьогодні спільно з Офісом просування експорту ми проведемо для вас наш 4-й вебінар, який буде присвячений викликам і можливостям для українських експортерів на ринку ЄС. Як і наш партнер, Офіс просування експорту, ми завжди сфокусовані на тому, щоб надавати унікальну, практичну інформацію для наших слухачів, яка сприяє їм краще орієнтуватися в нюансах роботи на європейському ринку. Але сьогодні ми хочемо трошки відійти від звичного алгоритму. Ми пропонуємо нашим слухачам на хвилинку вийти за звичні рамки своєї повсякденної діяльності. І сьогодні ми хочемо розповісти вам про пріоритети головування Німеччини в ЄС в контексті зовнішньої політики ЄС і відносин ЄС-України. Сьогодні у нас буде унікальна можливість в доступний спосіб відчути ширший політичний контекст, який впливатиме на роботу нашого бізнесу, українських експортерів на ринку ЄС, і також дізнатися на макрорівні про ті політичні тренди, ризики і можливості, які будуть впливати на наш бізнес в ЄС хоча б впродовж наступного півріччя. Ми дуже сподіваємося, що інформація, яку ви сьогодні почуєте від наших шановних німецьких гостей, дозволить вам по-новому, вийшовши з звичної системи координат, оцінити свої бізнес-моделі і підходи до роботи на ринку ЄС і на його ключовому сегменті Німеччини. Now I switch to English, and I have an honor to introduce our German guests. Ambassador Michael Siebert, Director for Eastern Europe, Caucasus and Central Asia at the German Federal Ministry for Foreign Affairs, an experienced senior German diplomat who oversees relations of Germany with Ukraine and other countries in the region. And we also have Professor Rainer Lindner, President of the German-Ukrainian Forum, a key platform for advancing friendly relations between our two countries in political, business, and cultural dimensions. Today, Ambassador Siebert and Professor Lindner will focus the discussion on three broad and overlapping areas. It's German EU presidency foreign policy priorities and how Ukraine features in them. What areas of cooperation with Ukraine will the Germany priorities during its presidency? Which areas of cooperation with Ukraine Germany will prioritize during its presidency? And among other things, EU financial assistance to Ukraine in the region, particularly at the times of the corona crisis, and what can we expect from the German presidency? Now, without too much ado, I pass the word to Professor Lindner, who together with Ambassador Siebert will guide us through these issues, and we are grateful for the very interesting discussion that awaits us. Professor Lindner, you have the floor.
Дякую, Nazar. Thank you very much. Good to be with you, and I think this is a great opportunity to have, at the very beginning of the German presidency, an insight for Ukrainian business, but also foreign policymakers. What is the priority for the German government in this very specific situation, having that presidency, being challenged with a lot of global and local issues. And I think we will have a great privilege to have Ambassador Siebert here with us this afternoon, and having managed to get an hour of this very tight schedule of Mr. Siebert from the Foreign Office. Indeed, he is the experienced expert and representative and responsible, basically, also for the region that includes Ukraine, Eastern Europe, Caucasus, Central Asia. So it's a good opportunity to talk. This day is a specific day. We just heard that the French government was stepping down, so there's a lot of change going on also inside Europe. But nevertheless, I think Eastern Europe is probably one of the priorities of the presidency, and I think we can also get into details in a Q&A session after the presentation. On Monday, and I just want to inform our friends here in the line from Ukraine, we had a very good opportunity to welcome the Deputy Minister of Economic Development, Trade and Agriculture, Mr. Taras Kachka from Ukraine, physically in Berlin, having a big conference on Ukraine about the relations between Germany and Ukraine. And we had also distinguished figures from the German government there, so that was a good opportunity also. Having said this, I would like to ask Ambassador Siebert to give us a short overview about the foreign policy priorities of this presidency, about the next 6 months, a very interesting, I think, period also for you personally. Mr. Siebert.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to the Ukrainian Business and Trade Association, and also to the German-Ukrainian Forum. Welcome, hello from Berlin. I think it is a very good time to speak about Ukraine and about what we want to do. As you just said, Rainer Lindner, we had this 20th anniversary of the German-Ukrainian Forum, which is a kind of pillar for our bilateral relations, in the economic, but also in other fields. And as you mentioned, our Deputy Minister, Michael Roth, was there on Monday at your conference to show the importance that we attach to not only your work, but also to the relations with Ukraine. And of course, this event today is very timely because we have just started our EU presidency a couple of days ago. And how should I say, an EU presidency is a daunting task at any time. And now people tell you this is not normal times. I guess there are no normal times, but there are especially unnormal times today, and it will be a very unusual presidency also. You know, as good Germans, we made a lot of plans to what to do during this presidency, and a couple of weeks ago, we had to very much adjust our program in two ways. First, in practical terms, because a presidency of the EU consists of running a lot of meetings with lots of people, summits, etc. And of course, it also englobes a lot of outreach to the broader public, to civil societies, etc. So on this, we had to now and still have to look, as the presidency is ongoing, how we can bring these meetings and these events in line with the requirements of the pandemic situation. So in practical terms, and then of course content-wise, also everything was kind of turned upside down, because the most important topic of our presidency has not been known, and nobody had envisaged it 6 months ago, or in the beginning of January, because we will have to take care of not only the pandemic itself in medical terms within the European Union, and European Union in relation with neighbors, partners, to commonly strive to finally get a victory over this pandemic, and also to manage, for instance, how we can live and work together and travel during these difficult times. But also, of course, we have to take care of the economic effects of this pandemic, which is of a magnitude that will kind of dwarf the effects of the famous financial crisis some 10 years ago. Is a factor multiplied by X compared to this last big international crisis. So this will be at the core of our presidency. Otherwise, of course, we will stick to what we had looked at before and what we had planned before. The question is, how much time will we have for each and every of these points that we would like to address. I will very briefly talk you to these 9 main foreign policy points that we have in mind. And as I say 9, I can guess that I will not go too much into detail, because otherwise we would not come to the more precise questions on EU Eastern Partnership and cooperation with Ukraine that I will also touch upon briefly. So what are these 9 areas? The first one is, I mentioned, that's the new one, the coordinating the EU efforts to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic. And the second one is also a very structured one. It's the economic recovery, as I mentioned, but it's linked to something that had to be done anyway, the so-called multi-annual financial framework. It's one of these horrible EU words. MFF. It's basically the budget of the EU for the next 7 years, and then also the next generation EU instrument. So to agree on that is always a major point, because we have different diverging interests within the European Union, also along fault lines that are a little bit north-south, and on one side with the countries that are net payers into the budget of the EU, and on the other side, the countries that are net receivers. Number 3 is concluding negotiations on the future relationship of the EU with the United Kingdom. So, with other words, Brexit. We already had a Brexit very much around at the beginning of this year, but it was kind of postponed because the main economic questions, how we will deal amongst ourselves between the UK and the EU, have been pushed forward and will have to be solved before the end of the transitional period, end of this year. So, and we have to prepare for anything. We really hope to get a comprehensive, transparent and far-reaching agreement with the British partners and friends to allow the economies on both sides to stay close together and not to suffer too much from Brexit. But we also have to prepare in parallel for a non-negotiated Brexit, the hard Brexit. Number 4 is advancing the EU's green and digital transformation. And I will briefly touch upon that again when we come to Eastern Partnership and Ukraine. Basically, this is a main effort of the European Union to prepare for the future, the green agenda and the digital agenda, because we think that these are two areas to prepare our countries and our economies for the future that have to be brought forward. The fifth area is strengthening European solidarity and social cohesion. This is something that has been exacerbated again by the pandemic, because the effect of the pandemic will most probably be that the differences in the social standards and also in economic performances will become wider. So the question of European solidarity will be even more important with the pandemic. Number 6 is making progress on the EU's migration and asylum policy, something that has been discussed very much, as you know, over the last 5 years, but is now almost a little bit in the back, given the other problems that we currently discuss. But we still need a sound policy which acts in solidarity, especially with the southern countries of the EU, where migrants arrive in Europe, and to see that they can handle the influx of people. And we also have to find ways to find good decisions on the fate of everybody coming, and then to see how migration can be channeled into the various countries. Not an easy topic at all. The 7th area is strengthening the rule of law as a key foundation of the European Union. And here again, it's an interesting topic, because you as listeners in Ukraine, you know this very much. We're talking a lot with you about it, but it's also a topic within the EU, because the rule of law is something that has to be fought for every day in every country. And especially in times when civil liberties are severely restricted by a pandemic and the effort to combat it, it's a huge topic even in Germany. And of course, it's also a topic in some member states where, as you know, we see tendencies towards less democratic and less legally cohesive developments. The 8th area is stabilizing our neighborhood, and that of course means the neighborhood east, and with Ukraine as the biggest partner there. But it also means the countries on the Western Balkan. It means the partnership with Africa as our neighboring continent, and I already mentioned the migration question. Africa is, of course, very much important to Europe also because of the migration. And we are trying to undertake efforts to help stabilize the situation in African countries so that migration or pressure is going down. And I would say on foreign policy, I would like to add also the need to develop a united position of Europe vis-à-vis China. I think that is also an interesting topic in Ukraine, because China worldwide is becoming a much more important player in terms of policy, but also in politics and also in terms of economics, of course. It will be very important in a world that is increasingly bipolar between the United States and China, for Europe, and I would add for countries, Europe as the European Union, but as well for countries like Ukraine that are part of Europe, not yet of the European Union. So here is also a big work ahead, and we can see the daily developments in Hong Kong that put this policy vis-à-vis China under stress. And the last and 9th point is not the least important. It is strengthening the EU's capacity to act at the global level. Some call it European sovereignty, some don't like this term, but I think it is very clear that Europe, and I mean it in the sense of the EU, but also as the wider Europe with all our partners and friends around in EFTA and in the Eastern Partnership and on the Western Balkans, Europe has to take, and we're very much convinced of that, has to take its own fate more into its own hands, and can less rely on support from the United States, for instance, which has been the case for many decades. This is not easy, given the fact that we are 27 plus old nations that all have their traditions and their ideas and their historic the history and the experiences drawn from that. So it's tedious, but we need to strengthen the EU's capacity, Europe's capacity to act politically and economically. So these are the big 9 foreign policy areas, and I would now like to move on to the Eastern Partnership as the area of neighboring countries, which Ukraine is, of course, part of, and the biggest part of. We, as you may know, have a regular framework to work with our Eastern partners, which normally sees a summit of all EU and Eastern Partnership countries about every 2 years. Now we are in a way very comfortable position, because we will have had already 2 summits within 9 months, one from the other. One was foreseen a couple of weeks ago, and it could not happen in the traditional physical way. So we decided to have it nevertheless on a virtual basis, and it took place and covered very much the question how we work to combat the pandemic and its consequences. This was on 18th of June, and we decided to have another summit, and hopefully a physical summit, a traditional summit, in the first half of next year. So what I would like to stress is that despite the tight schedule of politicians these days, even tighter schedule because of the pandemic, we decided to have both the virtual now and the physical later, to make sure that it is very clear and can be seen that Eastern Partnership is a priority for the European Union, and also, by the way, for our presidency. What will be the task of, I think that was one of the questions I was asked, our task as the EU presidency next 6 months with regard to Eastern Partnership. You know that there has been a big stakeholder exercise where every country, every institution, I guess the Ukrainian Business and Trade Association may have participated in that as well, sent many NGOs, etc., sent their ideas on the future of the Eastern Partnership to Brussels, and it was put together, and decisions were taken on the basis of that. The main new topic in dealing with the Eastern Partnership is the term of resilience. And I think it's a very timely one, because the pandemic shows in a different way than we expected that resilience is so important to all our countries these days. But resilience, of course, is something that applies to many areas, not only to the pandemic. So what we will have to do is to prepare for this next summit, which will be slightly after our presidency, but the main preparation phase will be under our presidency. And we will develop concrete and effective indicators to operationalize the strategic goals that has been adopted by the leaders of our countries. And that will be kind of the program, the framework program for the years from 2021 onwards. This is basically done by European institutions, by DG NEAR and European External Action Service, but as a presidency we will be very much supportive of that and look after that as well. We are also having some events, still, as I said, trying to adjust them to current conditions. We had foreseen for September a youth conference. That's the traditional youth conference of the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum. That should have taken place in a nice city in Saxony. Unfortunately, this will not be possible, as is easily understandable, but we will change it into a virtual youth conference, and we are confident that young people are so internet savvy and social media savvy that they can make best use of it under the prevailing circumstances. We will also plan for the scheduled ministerial meeting of environment ministers. This is, of course, a very important meeting for the inclusion of the Eastern Partnership countries into what I call the green agenda of Europe for the next years. It is a ministerial meeting. The 27 EU ministers and the 6 ministers from Eastern Partnership countries will meet in Luxembourg in October, and they will talk about how the European Union and Eastern Partnership countries can put their efforts together to achieve the green transformation of our economies and countries over the years and decades to come. And then we have foreseen a third big event, namely, and that may be most interesting to your members, namely a business forum to be held in Düsseldorf in November. We don't know yet how the situation will be. Maybe we can have it as a physical one. Maybe we can have it in hybrid form, that some people may be able to be present in Düsseldorf and others will be virtually connected. Or of course, in the worst case, we will have to do it in a virtual format as well. This is to help improve the investment climate, because that has been and will remain essential for developing economic relations between our countries. And that is what potential business partners from Germany and from other European countries are most interested when talking about Ukraine and the other countries of the Eastern Partnership. I would like to emphasize again, also with a view to recent news from Ukraine, that this key question of the investment climate has to be looked at in the whole area of the Eastern Partnership very closely over the next years, because the questions of governance, questions of the rule of law, questions of the fight against corruption are always at the mind of business partners interested in doing business with Ukraine and other countries of the region. Why did I say recent news that we heard of? I will have to maybe get back a little more. The past year was year 1 under President Zelensky. Basically, this year I think was a very good year for our relations with Ukraine, because there was a new impetus coming from his presidency and from his majority in the Rada to renew and refresh the reform policy. I don't have to tell you about the progress that has been achieved in numerous areas, from banking system to agricultural reform. I know there is a lot of debate in Ukraine, and that's normal with such far-reaching legal innovations. But we have had some news from Ukraine in the last days that we will have to watch very closely, namely the dismissal of the central bank boss in Kiev. This is we cannot make up our mind fully on what it exactly means, and we don't know yet. You probably don't know yet who will be the successor, but it is a principled question standing behind that, because an independent central bank it's not only a symbol, but it is in practical terms a very important tool of any market economy and a country where investment is sought after. So we cross fingers that the independence of the central bank will be maintained despite this sudden change in the leadership. I would like to go on a little bit, and then probably my time will be over quite soon. We go on to the Q&A part. Maybe talk a little bit more in detail about Ukraine itself, the view from our European presidency. A main event will be, a political event will be the EU-Ukraine summit, which will take place on the 1st of October during our presidency. And we will make sure that we will reaffirm the strong political and economic ties that I already mentioned that exist between the EU and Ukraine. This has to be a strong message in both directions, to the European side as well as to the Ukrainian side. We will also have the honor to prepare for the EU-Ukrainian Association Council. Ukraine, as you know, is one of the 3 countries among the Eastern Partnership friends that are associated and have a much closer association with the EU. That will take place in winter. I may add that with a view to Ukraine, the European Union and especially Germany and France are very much engaged in preserving the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine as being the Normandy, so-called Normandy former partners, to try and look after the problems in Donbass through the foreign intervention there. And we will have to make sure that this military conflict that is inflicted upon Ukraine should not damage the development of Ukraine, the economy, the society, politically. In the next years, it will not be easy to solve this conflict. Maybe we can at least hedge it, make it less bloody for the inhabitants of Eastern Ukraine on both sides of the contact line. And this, of course, is complemented by constant efforts, which we will continue under our EU presidency, to specifically look at the east of Ukraine, and I also mean the government-controlled areas of eastern Ukraine that economically and socially suffer so much from this conflict, from the ports of Mariupol and Berdyansk to all the cities and villages close to the contact line, let alone the areas currently not under control of the Ukrainian government. The EU and Germany have been very much behind the OSCE mission in Ukraine, and especially taking care of Donbass, the so-called SMM mission. We also have provided additional medical aid and try to allow them to continue their operations passing across the contact line. A lot of the macro financial assistance that the European Union is giving to Ukraine is also going to the east of the country, and also of the big chunk of the aid that is coming from Germany. Maybe I can repeat here that Germany has supported Ukraine over the last 5 years with approximately 1.2 billion euro in various areas. EU-Ukrainian relations have improved a lot under our constant efforts from both sides over the last years. You probably know that 40% of the Ukrainian external trade is now going to the European Union. We know that 5 or 10 years ago, this figure was very much different, and the main trade direction was going into another geographical area. And we have now almost 15,000 companies from Ukraine exporting into the European Union. These were only 11,000 a couple of years ago. So these are, I think, the positive effects of the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. And I hope that listeners and companies, your member companies, can testify on that. I would like to conclude with saying that we will use our European presidency vis-à-vis Ukraine to make sure that the European Union is and stays behind the policy of a very close cooperation with Ukraine, support for the reform policy that has been, as I said, has been intensified under President Zelensky. And we very much hope that on the Ukrainian side as well, all efforts will be undertaken to underpin this cooperation by strengthening the role of the institutions. We haven't mentioned the decentralization, which is a very important political administrative reform that is being implemented with quite some success, and also with a high-ranking German person, former minister, president of Saxony, as an advisor, which will allow to create this growing resilience of Ukraine vis-a-vis the pandemic, vis-a-vis the economic situation coming out of it, and vis-a-vis the outside difficulties that I alluded to as well. We are on your side, and I'm open for questions, and Rainer Lindner as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Siebert, for this very comprehensive picture about the priorities of the German presidency. And I can judge that there is a 24/7 regime now at the Foreign Office. I can imagine also the other ministries are at full speed, supporting also Chancellor Merkel in her, what we know, kind of last big European task. So this is, I think, these 9 points that you mentioned, a variety of directions, and I think COVID-19 is the major challenge at the moment, especially since we are observing, not just in the US, or people don't speak about India or other places where the numbers are high-ranking. I'm sorry to say this. So we are in the midst of the second wave, and hopefully we can handle this. So I think you mentioned in one of these points also the the Eastern Partnership, and specifically in your last remarks. Do you think that this success story of the partnership is something that is a positive development also for Ukraine, which has, as we all know, ambitions that go beyond partnership? We had the privilege to talk to the Vice Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration, Mrs. Stefashinova, on the other day. So there's a strong aspiration. I think Ukrainian companies that are here in line and online will also see a stronger, even stronger relation with the European Union. But I think we should have some, management of expectations in that regard. But would you say a few words on this, on the ambitions from Ukrainian side, but the realities in Europe?
I think there are ambitions and realities on both sides. Certainly, there are many people on both sides who want to see countries like Ukraine at one point becoming member of the European Union. There are probably on both sides also people who wouldn't like to see this, but it should be a minority, I guess. But realities on both sides tell us that it is not the time to talk about this concretely at the moment. I think we have gone huge steps in recent years. We have had, as I mentioned, the association agreement, the deep and comprehensive free trade area, and we had the visa liberalization for Ukrainians over the last very few years. And this somehow has to be implemented properly. The association agreement contains a lot of tasks and difficult homework, quote unquote, for Ukraine to acquire what we call in Europe the acquis, the set of measures, rules, and regulations that allow for a deeper integration with the European Union. So there is still quite some work to do. That's not kind of a sexy topic. It will cost a lot of money, patience, political debates, etc., to make Ukraine compatible with European structures.
Yeah.
And, we will have to see on this long way without nice peaks that we had with the visa liberalization and the association agreements. We have to find moments to showcase the progress that will be made in the coming years. Expectations have to be managed, absolutely. And that could be maybe sectoral integration over time in some sectors where a country like Ukraine has come very close to the EU standards. Yeah. We will have to look at ways to accommodate that and make it visible.
Mm-hmm. I think that the summit that you mentioned on October 1st, the EU-Ukraine summit during the presidency, will also say a word on the prolongation of DCFTA, which is also a next step to give also Ukraine a certain, perspective that this is not something that we approved for a couple of years, but this is a kind of long-term, cooperational format.
Yes, absolutely. It's set for the long term, and we will have to prepare ourselves and work for a moment when the political general situation will allow us to go more concrete steps towards more integration of Ukraine. I mean, I alluded to the Brexit that is still ahead of us, and I alluded to the questions of how we can make Europe more sovereign in the sense of more able to take its own decisions. This is something that we have to do. It's our homework in the European Union, and it has to be done before we can again include further countries.
And especially important that Brexit is not a kind of good example for others who are, struggling with certain coherence of the EU. So this is another post-Brexit priority, to keep the union together rather than run into more differences. So I think this is something that German presidency, again, very timely at the moment, to get us closer together. Also, given, I want to mention this here, a German Chancellor Merkel and a German President of the European Commission, which is also something that we should not forget about. Maybe there was one question from the audience about Germany and Ukraine, about fields of cooperation. I mean, we had this conference on Monday in Berlin, where we focused business-wise on agriculture, on the share that Ukraine can do within a kind of Green Deal, green economy Europe, and also automotive as a sector which is developing in Ukraine. I think we have some of the suppliers here in the audience as well, companies bigger and smaller, who would like to get on this track as well. So I think these are major economic fields of cooperation, sectoral cooperational fields. I think agriculture is still one of the best fields, not just for German cooperation, and we had some companies from both sides, but also Ukraine as a world exporter of agricultural material and agricultural products into the world market. So this is something, I think, which makes Ukraine also more interesting for the European Union countries as a market, as a producer and exporter, even further. Do you think that also other areas of interest could come up for German economy or German kind of cooperation, like IT or other fields? Is there a discussion in your perspective, also on a political level, that this market is going to be interesting for us?
I think, again, we have to look at the pandemic and its consequences here in the economic sector. One discussion that is going on in Germany is about the global supply chains. And these were under strain, as we know. And the big debate is, how much do we have to bring back central and strategic elements of our supply chain to Europe? And I take Europe in terms of geographical Europe, including friends and neighbors as Ukraine. We are looking at the role of China. I mentioned that. And we, of course, still have an interest, Ukrainians as well as the European Union, to do a lot of business with China. But in some areas, maybe it will be interesting for companies to bring back strategic parts of supply chain closer to home, and Ukraine could be an interesting partner for that, because Ukraine has very well-trained people, has a high level of education and professionalism, and the costs are not as high as in the European Union yet for companies. So if what I said before, if the overall conditions are investment friendly, I'm sure that Ukraine will become an interesting country for cooperation for German companies in that sense. And maybe another, you mentioned digital. Of course, digital. Everybody is doing digital, so you have to be good these days. Yeah, the Belarusians tell me they are the best in digital. The Armenians tell me, etc.
They are going with of Eastern Europe.
I'm sure the Ukrainians are also the best in digital. Everybody will get a share here if cleverly done. But also, I see a big field of cooperation, potential bigger cooperation in energy also. Energy, of course, with Ukraine, we think of gas transit and the like, but gas transit is maybe still a topic, but in 20, 30 years' time, gas transit will no longer be an important political topic, I'm sure. We are now on the verge of the next phase of international energy policy internationally, and we now have to prepare for the energies of the future. And here I think Ukraine and Germany especially can have a lot of cooperation together. Germany goes ahead with doing away with coal over the next 10, 15 years. I'm sure Ukraine also will at some point go that way, and we will have to look. We can look together into alternative energies, into making economizing energy, so that we just need fewer energy. These are areas where we can cooperate together, I'm sure.
Yeah. I think this is a very important subject also when it comes to bioenergy, where Ukraine is a strong market for, probably the strongest in Europe. Undiscovered potential, I think. We have a lot of, and I looked through the list of participants, we have a lot of representatives from the food processing, agricultural background. And I think the question which is key for many of them is the quota on the European market in the perspective. And DCFTA gives a lot of opportunities here, but I think the expectation of the Ukrainian business and companies would be to get more share of the European market, to get that access for their products. Also when it comes to the standards and certificates in these areas. Do you think that you know, the next EU summit or other negotiations would ease the situation further for this kind of sector?
Yes, I'm sure, and we are constantly working on that. European market, of course, is one of the most demanding in the world in terms of, as you say, standards and certification and sanitary regulations and all that. But there are a lot of European programs already that can help Ukrainian companies to certify with these requirements, and this once you take this relatively high hurdle to qualify your products for this demanding market, it is of course a big entry door to a wonderful market of so many hundreds of millions of relatively wealthy customers who are keen on, also you mentioned the agricultural sector, on well-produced, healthy, ecological agricultural products. This is a huge market, and I'm sure Ukraine will benefit from that.
And I think also, and we are coming to the end of the discussion, probably there will be one or two questions from the audience. Also what you discussed in terms of the expert call it nearshoring, so the return of investments and footprint, localization to Europe or into the European neighborhood, probably from China or from elsewhere, or to diversify sourcing strategies and supply chain. I think you're absolutely right that Central and Eastern Europe could play a role here. Ukraine as a market with a good also logistical network. And I was just the other month at the terminal, at the cargo terminal in Odessa, and I've seen those a lot of opportunities, not just for Chinese containers coming in and out from there, but also for other European partners. So I think Ukraine is just also not just a production hub, and could be and should develop, but also a logistics a hub for kind of crossroad in European neighborhood. And this is another, I think, aspect and asset that Ukraine can bring in here. All right, Nazar, are there any additional questions from the audience?
For the moment, we have registered additional question from one participant, and if I rephrase it correctly, the question is about the expected window of opportunity to revise and update the trade segment of the EU-Ukraine DCFTA. And probably we should rephrase the question in the sense how the German EU presidency look at this opportunity which is offered by the association agreement, and whether you would like to, whether the German presidency would react if the Ukrainian government will step up with any initiative in this respect. This is the only question we have seen from the audience so far in the chat box, and perhaps I wonder whether Ambassador would be willing to respond.
I admit this is a rather specific question to the in terms of economic policy under the association agreement. It's on, yeah. So that it's not really within my field of competence here in the political section of the foreign ministry. But if need arises to adjust the association agreement, I'm sure that we will be very open to talk with our Ukrainian partners about that. But in the meantime, I guess, as I said before, there's still a lot to fill from this agreement, and to fill it with legal practice and with life, with economic life.
Yeah, and I think this is there's a strong political will in the European Union, definitely. You mentioned also the Normandy format that had been revived recently after a kind of 3 years break. And of course, we also expect efforts from the two conflict sides, especially from Russia, to de-engage and disengage here, and to finally agree on the Minsk agreement. And I think, and I hope that also during Germany's presidency there will be certain progress on that regard. But I mean, again, there are so many expectations, not from Ukraine just alone, but there are other countries in our neighborhood who would say this and that has to be resolved and you know, flattened as a big issue by Germany. So we also need to keep it cool, because you cannot change the world in 6 months, even if you try. I think there's a lot of political and economic will. I just want to remind us about the $5 billion support package from the IMF for Ukraine that was launched on June 9th, also to cover certain crisis effects of the COVID-19, but also other economic issues. So there's more to come also from the World Bank. There's a lot of support from Germany. There's a tranche of, I think, 150 million euro left out of this 500 million package that Germany agreed upon a couple of years ago. So they will also use this one. There is the energy partnership agreement that will probably be signed during the presidency between Germany and Ukraine as well. There was a confirmation on Monday by State Secretary Vandavitz about that. So to sum it up, I think there's a lot of ongoing political and economic will on both sides. There are also smaller initiatives like my forum, who was just supporting people in need in Ukraine during the Corona crisis. So there's also a civic cooperational level that we are trying to use on a daily basis. And that's why I think a discussion as today gives a certain insight also to our friends in Ukraine and the partners, the business partners, that we are trying to do the utmost to keep Ukraine on its track to Europe, not the geographic, but the political Europe, but at the same time to make a certain realism happen that everybody has the same expectation. Thank you for that discussion. Thank you, Michael Siebert, and I give back to Tanya.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all your insights and inputs. And we will hope for the mutually fruitful cooperation in the future. Thank you very much, Nazar. And thank you, and wish you all the best for today and for the rest of the month. And I hope that this COVID crisis will be over soon and we could start, hopefully, travel to each other and have more offline events and activities in order to strengthen our cooperation and promote Ukrainian goods and services to Germany and German services and goods from Germany to Ukraine, and promote the trade, our mutual trade. Thank you very much.
And also on behalf of the UBTA, I would like to also thank our distinguished German speakers today. And briefly, very briefly summing up, I think our business audience, our exporters should keep in mind two key messages that we have heard today. One is that Berlin and Germany presidency remains to be fully committed to Ukraine's strength, political strength, independence, and continues to support us in this very difficult period of, let's say, defending our sovereignty in the context of the Russian conflict. I think this is an important message of political support for our political stability. And second, a very important message is that from the German foreign policy perspective, Ukraine has a considerable potential in many areas of trade with Germany and with Europe, and that Germany, at least from a foreign policy perspective, keeps this in mind and encourages our exporters to go out and venture and to explore these opportunities, provided that we know the rules and play them well in line with our European, let's say, commitments. On behalf of the UBTA, I also would like to thank our speakers and to Export Promotion Office, Tatiana, for this another wonderful opportunity.
Thank you very much for having me, for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to discuss this with you. We will keep in touch, and I say, see you again soon without this.
Very cool.
I like this with the symbol of the presidency. Thank you,
Yes.
Ambassador Siebert, and also to BJA in Berlin, Mr. Hachenberg, for preparing us here. And have a nice weekend. Do popatrzenia.
Do popatrzenia.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.